Imagine a room, not a battlefield, where the fate of empires is decided. There are no cannons, no clashing swords, only the stifling heat of too many bodies packed into a single chamber. The air thick with sweat and unvoiced prayers. At its center is not a king upon a throne, but a queen upon a birthing bed, her knuckles white as she grips blood-soaked linens. Her agony is not a private matter. It is a public spectacle. The silent, staring faces surrounding her are not physicians or family, but courtiers, ambassadors, and ministers of state. They are not here to offer comfort. They are here to bear witness, to verify that the child emerging from her body is legitimate, and to signal its gender, the single fact that could trigger war or secure peace. This was not a nightmare. This was the duty of a queen. This scene, in its many harrowing variations, was the ultimate reality for the most powerful women in history. We study their portraits, admiring the silks and jewels, and read of the dynasties they secured. But behind the serene facade of the royal portrait lies a hidden world of biological tyranny. It is a world where a woman's worth was measured not by her wisdom or her will, but by the fruitfulness of her womb. The true antagonist in the story of these queens was not an invading army or a political rival, but an abstract and relentless force, the insatiable demands of the royal bloodline. It was a pressure that drove women like Catherine de' Medici to endure years of ritual humiliation, and condemned queens like Anne of England to a lifetime of phantom pregnancies and a crypt filled with tiny coffins. This is not merely a collection of tragic tales. It is the story of the invisible foundation upon which great dynasties were built, a foundation of human sacrifice, paid for by the bodies and souls of women. We will move past the marble monuments and the gilded chronicles to enter the silent, desperate world of the royal bedchamber. We will uncover how these women, so often reduced to their reproductive function, navigated a life of immense pressure with quiet resilience, and how their true legacies were forged not in the children they bore, but in the very act of survival. This is the story of the hidden cost of royal blood. As it has never been told before, the year is 1761. The English Channel, a churning expanse of gray and slate blue, is uncharacteristically calm, as if holding its breath for the arrival of a queen. Aboard the royal yacht, Royal Charlotte, a vessel renamed in her honor, a young woman of 17 stands clutching the railing, her knuckles a bloodless white against the polished wood. This is Princess Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and for weeks, this ship has been her entire world. It is a floating purgatory, suspended between the simple, structured, and intellectually vibrant life she knew in a minor German duchy and the unimaginable destiny awaiting her on the shores of a global empire. Her home, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, was a place of quiet dignity but profound political obscurity. It was a land of forests and lakes, governed by a sensible, unpretentious court where music and botany were prized above military conquest. Charlotte's education had been liberal, her mind nurtured on philosophy and the arts. But none of that mattered now. The intricate dance of European politics, a game of thrones played with marriage contracts, had selected her. She had been chosen for her temperament, reputed to be placid and good-natured, and for her Protestant faith. But most importantly, she was chosen for her perceived innocence and lack of political connections, which made her a safe, malleable choice for the young King George III. She does not yet speak the language of her new home. She has never met the man who, in a matter of hours, will be her husband. She knows him only through formal portraits that render him a stiff, remote figure, and through the dry, political calculus of the contract that has ripped her from her homeland and set her on this inexorable course. Her arrival is a meticulously staged piece of theater, designed to overwhelm and impress. As the yacht docks, the air erupts with the thunder of cannon salutes and the roar of a London crowd, a thousand-headed beast hungry for a glimpse of its new queen. The weight of her wedding gown, a universe of silver thread, lace, and diamonds, feels less like a garment and more like an elaborate, beautiful cage. The jewels, cold and heavy against her skin, are not gifts of personal affection, but symbols of state, the property of a crown she is now meant to serve. As she is escorted into a gilded carriage, the faces pressed against the glass are a blur of curiosity and expectation. During the ride to St. James's Palace, she sits ramrod straight, a portrait of composure she does not feel. The city assaults her senses, the smell of coal smoke and river mud, the cacophony of iron-shod wheels on cobblestone, the sheer, sprawling immensity of it all. Upon entering the palace, a sea of unfamiliar faces parts before her. These are the English courtiers, a species she does not yet understand. Their bows are deep, their smiles thin, their expressions a carefully constructed mask of deference. But their eyes are sharp, analytical. They assess her posture, her complexion, her gait, even the way her hands tremble in her lap. Every detail is catalogued, every quality weighed. In their silent, collective gaze, Charlotte can feel the unspoken question, the single, monumental expectation that rests upon her frail shoulders. She has been chosen for one paramount reason: to be a mother to a king, to provide heirs, to secure the Hanoverian line. For all the pomp and ceremony, for all the thunderous applause and glittering jewels, her future rested not in her crown, but in the unseen, untested depths of her own body. A vessel that, for some who wore a crown before her, had remained tragically, damningly empty. Decades earlier, in the glittering, treacherous court of 16th century France, another queen had understood the terror of that emptiness with an intimacy that bordered on madness. For Catherine de' Medici, an orphaned Italian heiress thrust into a hostile French court, the first 10 years of her marriage to Henri, the Dauphin, were not a honeymoon, but a public trial by biology, a decade. It is a period of time that can build empires or see them fall. For Catherine, it was an eternity of 120 months, each one a cycle of desperate hope followed by the same quiet, private shame, the same crimson proof of her failure that stained her bed sheets. The whispers followed her like a shadow, growing louder with each passing season. L'Italiana, they called her, la sterile, the Italian, the barren one. The words were poison darts, questioning not just her fertility, but her very right to be Queen of France. The court of Francis Vivre was a hotbed of Renaissance brilliance and cutthroat politics. And in this world, a woman's currency was her womb. The threat of repudiation, of being cast aside for a more fruitful bride, was not a distant fear, but a constant, suffocating presence, a topic of open speculation in the palace corridors. Her husband, Henri, offered no comfort. His devotion, his passion, his political counsel, it all belonged to another. His mistress, the formidable Diane de Poitiers, a woman nearly 20 years his senior, held more power in her little finger than Catherine did in her entire being. Catherine was forced to watch as Diane, confident and radiant, held court, advising the Dauphin, dispensing patronage, and receiving the deference owed to a queen. While Diane flourished, Catherine was subjected to a different kind of ritual. She became a medical specimen, her body a project for the kingdom's most esteemed physicians. She was bled, purged, and examined. Her intimate life with Henri was not private, but a matter of state, its mechanics dissected by doctors who offered theories as useless as they were humiliating. As the historian Leonie Frieda notes, she was desperate enough to try anything. She drank foul-tasting concoctions of mule's urine and wild herbs, prescribed to alter the mysterious chemistry of her body. She allowed poultices of cow dung and ground stag's antlers to be applied to her source of life, enduring the stench and the indignity with a stoicism born of sheer terror. Each new remedy was a new layer of degradation, a new ritual of hope and despair. Here was a woman of sharp intellect, a student of politics and power, a mind that could grasp the intricate webs of European diplomacy. Yet her intelligence was worthless. Her thoughts were irrelevant. She was the future Queen of France. Yet she was made to feel like livestock, her entire existence reduced to a single, malfunctioning biological function. The crown on her head was a phantom, the true measure of her power. Her very survival lay in the hollow ache within her womb. But what if the vessel was not empty? What if it was endlessly, fatally full? We move now from the cold palaces of Europe, with their psychological tortures, to the sultry plains of 17th century India and the opulent court of the Mughal Empire. Here, there was no question of the queen's fertility. In fact, her fertility was the very source of her legend and her doom. Arjumand Banu Begum, known to the world as Mumtaz Mahal, the chosen one of the palace, was the cherished, beloved wife of the Emperor Shah Jahan. Theirs was a celebrated love story, an epic of devotion that would be immortalized in stone. They were partners, confidants, lovers, a union so deep that she accompanied him everywhere, even on his grueling military campaigns. But in the 17th century, an emperor's love could be its own kind of curse, a gilded cage of devotion. In 19 years of marriage, her body was almost constantly occupied with the task of creating life. It was a relentless biological siege, while Shah Jahan's other, less favored wives bore him one child each and were then allowed to live in relative peace. Mumtaz's status as the favorite meant she yielded him 14 pregnancies. Her body became a testament to his love and the primary instrument of his dynastic ambition. It was a battlefield of perpetual motherhood, never given a season to recover, never allowed a moment of rest. Imagine the scene: the great Mughal army on the move, a city of thousands of soldiers, elephants, and carts kicking up a storm of dust under the brutal Indian sun. And in the middle of it all, a heavily pregnant queen, jostled for miles in a palanquin. The grandeur of the imperial procession, a stark contrast to the physical misery she must have endured. In the year 1631, in a makeshift royal camp in Burhanpur, this relentless cycle reached its breaking point. She was in labor with her 14th child. The ordeal began, and it did not end. It stretched on, hour after agonizing, sun-scorched hour. An entire day passed. A long, torch-lit night filled with screams and prayers gave way to a horrifying dawn. For 30 hours, she labored, her cries echoing through the silken tent walls, a sound that must have reduced the most powerful man in the world to a state of terrified impotence. The baby, a girl, was eventually born alive, but the ordeal had shattered Mumtaz's body. She began to hemorrhage, the life draining out of her onto the very linens where she had just created it. Modern medicine could have saved her. A simple transfusion, basic surgical intervention. But in 1631, all the wealth of the Mughal Empire, all the power of a grief-stricken emperor, was useless against the unstoppable tide of blood. She died in her husband's arms, her last breath a testament to a love that demanded everything, and a body that had nothing left to give. Her death was the inciting incident for the creation of the world's most beautiful tomb, the Taj Mahal. But before it was a monument to love, it was a gravestone for motherhood itself. The life of a queen had been changed forever because it had been extinguished. In the wake of a tragedy like the one that befell Mumtaz Mahal, a dynasty is scarred. A love story is immortalized in stone. But the world moves on. Her death, while spectacular in its grief, was a singular event. But what happens when the tragedy is not a single, shattering blow, but a slow, grinding attrition? A war fought not in one bloody battle, but over years of relentless, soul-crushing skirmishes. For that story, we must leave the sun-scorched plains of India and return to the damp, gray chill of England at the dawn of the 18th century, to the court of Queen Anne. For Anne, there was no single, dramatic point of no return. Her entire reign was a point of no return. Her body had become a public ledger of dynastic failure, its sad history known to all of England. The initial response to her first losses, back when she was a young princess, had been a mixture of private grief and public duty, the expected response of a royal woman. She would mourn, she would recover, and she would try again. It was what was expected. It was her function. But after the 5th loss, the 10th, the 15th, the response mutated into something else entirely. It became a grim, mechanical ritual of survival. Hope, for Anne, was a dangerous, intoxicating poison that she was forced to drink again and again. Each new pregnancy was announced with cautious optimism in the halls of Parliament. The nation would hold its collective breath. Anne's days became a careful regimen, her every meal and activity monitored. but her body seemed cursed. Some pregnancies would end in a sudden, violent miscarriage, a gush of blood, and a hollow emptiness. Others would progress, only for the baby to be born still, a perfect, silent doll of porcelain flesh. A few, cruelly, would live for a few minutes, or a few hours, just long enough to be baptized and given a name before their tiny lungs gave out. The historian Norman Davies describes the grim procession each tiny coffin, carried to the vaults of Westminster Abbey to lie in the cold dark, was another entry in the devastating account of the Stuart dynasty's biological bankruptcy. Her initial reaction, years ago, had been to weep. Now, her grief was a colder, heavier thing. It was a permanent resident in the chambers of her heart. She carried the weight of her dead children with her always. A physical ache in her joints, what we now might diagnose as inflammatory arthritis or lupus, but what she experienced as the physical manifestation of sorrow. To survive, she learned to compartmentalize. She focused on the business of rule, immersing herself in the endless political squabbles of the Whigs and Tories. Finding distraction in the minutiae of state, she delegated, she governed, she played the part of the monarch, but every twinge in her womb, every rumor of another royal pregnancy in a foreign court, was a reminder of her own profound public failure. Her reaction was not to fight the system, but to endlessly, obediently submit to it, offering her body time and again to the altar of succession, a testament to the quiet, desperate endurance of a woman with no other choice. Anne's prolonged agony was the tragedy of a queen who was given too many chances to fail. But what of those for whom there was no second chance? What of the queens, for whom the first failure was also the last, whose brief, flickering lives were consumed by the system before they even had time to understand it? The machine of dynastic succession was ruthlessly efficient. If one part broke, it was simply discarded and replaced. For this, we look to the sad, fleeting stories of women who were treated as little more than disposable vessels. Consider Isabella of Valois, the daughter of a French king. She became a pawn in the great game before she could even spell her own name. Married to King Richard II of England at the age of 6, she was a child bride living in a foreign land, her childhood stolen by the cold necessities of a political alliance. Widowed at 11, she was eventually returned to France, only to be married off once more, this time to her cousin, Charles, Duke of Orleans. At 17, her reproductive duty began in earnest. The pressure was immediate and immense. Her first pregnancy ended in a stillbirth. Her second produced a daughter who died in infancy. Her third, in 1409, would kill them both. Isabella died in the agony of childbirth, just shy of her 20th birthday. 3 pregnancies in 3 years. Her body, barely past adolescence, had been used up and broken by the desperate pace of royal reproduction. She was a footnote, a failed attempt, her tragedy swiftly eclipsed by her husband's search for a new wife. Or look to the story of Constance of Castile, the second wife of King Louis VII of France in the mid-12th century. Her entire reign was defined by the failure of her predecessor. Louis had famously divorced the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine, partly on the grounds that in nearly 15 years of marriage, she had given him only 2 daughters, The kingdom needed a male heir. Constance was brought in specifically to solve this problem. Can you imagine the pressure? Her value was singular, her purpose explicit. From the moment she arrived at court, her entire existence was monitored. Every menstrual cycle was a political crisis. Every month she was not pregnant was a mark against her. She did her duty with remarkable frequency, bearing daughters in quick succession, but each baby girl was a disappointment, another failure to produce the coveted son. After approximately 6 years of this relentless pressure and constant childbearing, her body gave out. She died, likely from the complications of her last delivery in 1160. Like Isabella, she was a casualty, a means to an end. Her husband Louis grieved, but the needs of the dynasty were paramount. He swiftly married a third time to Adele of Champagne, who finally produced the male heir. Philip Augustus. Constance's life and death were reduced to a mere stepping stone in this relentless quest. Her suffering forgotten, her purpose fulfilled only by her replacement. The failure to produce a male heir could erase a queen from history, but what, then, is the meaning of a queen who produces one, only to have him snatched away by fate? What is the psychological toll when the one flickering candle of hope you have shielded against the storm for a decade is suddenly, violently extinguished? For this final, cruel turn of the screw, we must return to Queen Anne. Amidst the wasteland of her 17 failed pregnancies, there had been one miraculous exception. One single, vibrant spark of hope. William, Duke of Gloucester. He was born in 1689, and against all odds, he survived. He survived the treacherous first weeks, the dangerous first year. He grew into a boy for Anne, and for all of Protestant England. He was everything. He was the future. He was the living, breathing proof that the Stuart line would continue, that the Catholic threat from his exiled grandfather, James II, would be kept at bay. Anne doted on him with a fierce, protective love sharpened by the memory of all the others she had lost. He was, however, a fragile child suffering from hydrocephalus, or water on the brain, which gave him an overlarge head and caused him to suffer from seizures. But he was bright, and he was hers. He was alive. In the summer of 1700, the court celebrated his 11th birthday at Windsor Castle with days of feasting and fireworks. William, full of youthful pride, was said to have overexerted himself. Shortly after the festivities, he complained of fatigue and a fever. At first, it was dismissed as a chill, but his condition rapidly worsened. The best physicians in the kingdom were summoned. They descended upon the boy's chambers, their faces grim, their methods archaic and useless. They argued over diagnoses. They bled him, hoping to release the bad humors. They applied hot plasters that blistered his skin. Anne was frantic. For days, she did not leave his bedside, watching as her son's fever raged, his breathing growing more shallow. The scene was one of terrifying impotence. Here was the Queen of England, one of the most powerful rulers in the world, unable to do anything but watch as her only surviving child, the future of her dynasty, slipped away from her. The shocking revelation was not a secret plot or a hidden enemy. It was the stark, brutal, undeniable truth laid bare. The game is rigged. Fate, or God, or biology, whatever one chose to call the force that governed their lives, was not merely indifferent, it was cruel. After all her suffering, after 17 attempts, after guarding this one precious life for 11 years, it meant nothing. He died on July 30th, 1700. The news shattered the kingdom, but it annihilated Anne. It was more than the death of a son. It was the death of possibility. It was the moment that the abstract threat of a failed succession became an ironclad certainty. With William's death, the Stuart dynasty died too. All that was left was for Anne to play out her reign, a queen ruling over a kingdom whose future now belonged to distant German cousins. The vault at Westminster, filled with the ghosts of her infant children, now held a new and terrible significance. It was no longer just a place of personal sorrow. It was the final, undisputed tomb of a royal line. The story of Queen Anne ends in the silence of a tomb, a quiet monument to futility. Her submission to the dynastic machine resulted only in the extinction of her line, a lesson in the cruelty of fate. If endurance and obedience lead to ruin, what then is the alternative? What happens when a queen, blessed with an iron will and a mind as fertile as her womb, decides not merely to endure the system, but to conquer it, to become the system itself? A matriarch empress who would turn the very act of childbirth into an instrument of imperial statecraft. For this, we must turn our gaze to the heart of 18th century Europe, to the formidable court of Vienna, and to the woman who would become the mother of an empire, Maria Theresa of Austria. When Maria Theresa ascended to the Habsburg thrones in 1740, her claim was immediately challenged by the wolves of Europe, most notably Frederick the Great of Prussia. The ensuing war of the Austrian succession was a trial by fire that forged her core philosophy. She realized that to survive, she could not simply be a monarch. She had to be a dynasty. Her marriage to Francis of Lorraine was a genuine love match, a rare blessing, but she subordinated even this love to the cold, hard calculus of state. Her personal happiness was a luxury. The survival of the House of Habsburg was a necessity. And so began the most remarkable reproductive and political career in modern history. For nearly 2 decades, her body was in a near constant state of pregnancy, while her mind was simultaneously governing one of Europe's largest empires. It is a duality that defies imagination. Picture her in the Hofburg Palace in the morning, discussing troop movements with generals. In the afternoon, forced to retire from exhaustion, she negotiated treaties, planned campaigns, and managed the marriages of her elder children while giving birth to their younger siblings. 16 children were born to her in 18 years, 15 of whom survived. It was a human production line for the preservation of a dynasty. This was her midpoint, her irreversible decision. She would not be a victim of her biology. She would be its master. Motherhood, for her, was transformed from a passive, perilous duty into an active, aggressive political strategy. Her children were not merely children. They were Habsburg assets, pawns, on the grand chessboard of Europe. Their marriages were meticulously planned to forge alliances and extend Austrian influence from Italy to France. Her letters to them, particularly to her daughters, are chilling masterpieces of maternal love intertwined with cold political instruction. To Maria Carolina, Queen of Naples, she demanded she exert influence over her husband. To her youngest, Maria Antonia, soon to be the infamous Marie Antoinette, she sent a constant stream of advice on how to serve the interests of Austria. She had conquered the system, but the price was steep. She had turned her family into a factory of diplomacy, and in doing so, had commodified the very children she bore. It was a victory, yes, but a victory that required a piece of her soul as payment. To turn children into political assets is to forge weapons that one cannot always control. To raise them as princes, saturated with ambition, is to nurture a pride that can easily curdle into rebellion. Centuries before Maria Theresa perfected this dangerous art, another formidable queen learned this lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. She was a woman who, like Maria Theresa, was a ruler in her own right, a queen who bore a pack of lion cubs only to be mauled by them. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Her life was lived in 2 acts. As Queen of France, married to the pious Louis VII, she was a vibrant force in a drab court, but deemed a failure for producing only daughters. Their annulment was a public humiliation. But for Eleanor, it was a liberation. Within months, she married the dynamic Henry Plantagenet, soon to be King Henry II of England. This union was an explosion of energy and fertility. Together, they created the sprawling Angevin Empire, and Eleanor fulfilled her side of the bargain with breathtaking success. To Henry, she bore 5 sons and 3 daughters. She had given him what Louis could not, a brood of ambitious, powerful sons: Henry the young king, Richard the Lionheart, Geoffrey, and John. For years, the Angevin Empire was a family business, but a family of vipers. Henry II was a brilliant but domineering ruler who gave his sons titles but little real power, breeding deep resentment. Eleanor, meanwhile, established her own glittering court at Poitiers, fostering a culture of rebellion in her favorite sons. The consequences of her reproductive success began to fester. She had not just produced heirs, she had produced rivals to their own father. The breaking point came in 1173, the Great Revolt. It was a staggering betrayal. Her sons, led by Henry the young king, rose in rebellion against their father, and in a move that shocked Christendom, Eleanor, their mother, chose her sons over her husband. Her motives remain debated by historians. Was it a cold power play, resentment at being sidelined, or the fierce instinct of a lioness defending her cubs' inheritance? Whatever the reason, her choice was the direct consequence of her own dynastic success. The revolt was ultimately crushed by Henry II. Her sons were forgiven. She was not. She was captured while trying to flee, and for the next 16 years, Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in the world, became a prisoner, moved from castle to castle at her husband's command. Her world shrank from an empire to a single, lonely room. She had provided the heirs, and in return, the system she had so successfully served stripped her of everything but her life. Eleanor survived her imprisonment. She outlived her husband and most of her sons, re-emerging as a legendary queen mother, a tough, indomitable survivor. But survival itself can be a kind of slow death. There is perhaps no greater tragedy, no deeper nadir than the story of the queen who does everything perfectly, wins every battle, and secures every victory, only to die of a broken heart, alone. This is the story of Blanche of Castile, Queen of France. If one were to design the perfect medieval queen, she would look like Blanche, a Spanish princess married to the heir of France. She was a foreigner who quickly won the love of her husband, Louis VIII, and the respect of the French court. She fulfilled her primary duty with success, bearing 12 children. Her world shattered in 1226 when her husband died suddenly, leaving her a widow with a 12-year-old son. The future King Louis XIX, the great barons of France, smelling weakness, immediately rose in rebellion. Blanche's situation was critical, but she did not falter. In a display of political genius and sheer force of will, she outmaneuvered them all. She had her son crowned within a month. She faced down the rebellious nobles, sometimes through shrewd diplomacy, sometimes by leading an army herself. For a decade, she ruled France as regent, a single mother holding a kingdom together. She was the model of strength, piety, and duty. Even after her son came of age, her influence remained immense, her love for him fierce and protective. She had succeeded where so many others had failed, but her very success contained the seeds of her lowest point. Her son was not just a king. He was a man of intense, almost fanatical piety. He became St. Louis. In 1248, against his mother's desperate advice, Louis IX embarked on the Seventh Crusade, leaving a devastated Blanche once again as regent. Years passed. Then, the news began to filter back news of disaster. The French army had been routed in Egypt, and Louis himself, the center of Blanche's world, had been captured and was being held for an exorbitant ransom. For Blanche, this was the ultimate failure. The son she had dedicated her entire life to protecting was now a prisoner, a world away. The psychological toll was more than her body could bear. Her health, always fragile, collapsed completely. In 1252, while traveling, she suffered a heart attack. She was brought to Paris, where she died, her last thoughts consumed with the fate of her captive son. She had won every political battle, only to be defeated by her son's faith. She died at the absolute pinnacle of her political success and the absolute nadir of her personal despair. She died utterly alone, her heart broken by the one person she had sacrificed everything for. The perfect queen had met the most imperfect end. A final, crushing lesson that in the game of thrones and wombs, even total victory is a form of defeat. From the nadir of personal desolation, where even the perfect devotion of a queen like Blanche of Castile leads to ruin, the narrative must pivot to the ultimate confrontation. The long war between the royal woman and the relentless demands of her bloodline cannot end in quiet surrender. It must culminate in a final, horrifying crystallization of the conflict itself, a moment where the system of dynastic duty reveals its true, monstrous face in its most public and intimate ritual. This is not a battle of swords or armies. It is a battle for the soul, fought in a single room, under the gaze of 100 expectant eyes. The year is 1778. The place is the antechamber to the Queen's bedchamber at the Palace of Versailles. The Queen is Marie Antoinette, and she is in labor. For 12 agonizing hours, she has been a public spectacle. The Queen's bedchamber, the most private space in any normal woman's life, has been transformed into a theater of cruelty. It is a stiflingly hot, airless room, its windows sealed for months against the winter cold to prevent any ill vapors from harming the Queen. But the heat comes not from fireplaces, but from the sheer press of human bodies. Dozens of people are here, a morbid crowd of the highest-ranking aristocrats, ministers, foreign ambassadors, and even simple, well-connected courtiers, all jostling for a position, all craning their necks to see. As the historian Antonia Fraser describes, they are not here to offer comfort. They are here as official witnesses, a tradition meant to prevent any healthy male heir from being swapped for a sickly one, or worse, for a girl. They are the guardians of the bloodline, and their presence transforms a medical emergency into a state-sanctioned violation. Marie Antoinette, young and terrified, thrashes on the enormous ornate birthing bed. Every wave of pain is met with a ripple of commentary, a murmur from the crowd. Every cry she emits is analyzed for its political implications. Is she strong? Is she weakening? The world has shrunk to this one. Suffocating room. A contraction rips through her body, a pain so blinding she can barely breathe. Her scream is lost in the rustle of silk and the cloying scent of sweat and heavy perfume. A sea of faces, pale and bewigged in the candlelight, swims before her eyes. In her delirium, they cease to be human. They are a single, many-eyed beast, and she is its sacrifice, her body the altar upon which the future of the Bourbon dynasty rests. This is the climax. This is the system in its purest form, raw, invasive, and utterly devoid of humanity. Then, the moment arrives, the child is born. A frantic scramble ensues as the official physician, holding the newborn, pushes through the throng. The baby's sex must be verified. The fate of alliances, the mood of the nation, hangs in this singular moment. But the crush of people is too great. The heat, the stench, the lack of oxygen after 12 hours of torment is too much for the exhausted queen. Her eyes roll back in her head, and she faints. A deathly pallor spreading across her face as she suffers a convulsive fit. Panic erupts. The king, Louis XVI, in a rare display of decisive action, rushes to the windows, frantically trying to break the seals to let in fresh air. Physicians shout for bleeding equipment, the standard cure for everything from fever to fainting. For a moment, it seems the queen might die, here, in front of everyone. She is saved, revived by the sharp, stinging pain of bloodletting from her foot. Only then, as she drifts back to consciousness, is the verdict on her labor delivered, not with a cry of joy, but with the cold, silent gesture of courtly code. An attendant crosses her arms. The baby is a girl. In the eyes of the court, her first great duty has ended in disappointment. She has faced the beast and survived. But the confrontation has stripped away the last vestiges of her private self, leaving her what the system always intended her to be: a public body, a vessel. Its contents now assessed, recorded, and found wanting. The chamber finally empties. The air cools. The political verdict has been rendered, and a daughter, Marie-Therese, the future Madame Royale, now breathes in the quieted room. The climax is over. And in the silence that follows the silence of the following days, years, and centuries, the true, hollow accounting of this long war begins. The dust settles, not on a field of victory, but on the ashes of dynasties, revealing a landscape of profound, tragic irony. For all the suffering, for all the bodies broken and lives consumed on the altar of succession, the grand project almost always failed. The bloodlines they died to create withered away with an almost poetic sense of futility. The Stuart dynasty, for which Queen Anne sacrificed her health, her happiness, and her body 17 times, ended with her. Her reign was politically successful, but her biological destiny was a wasteland. The House of Valois, for which Catherine de' Medici endured a decade of public humiliation and medical torture before bearing 10 children, ended with her sickly sons. Her cunning and endurance bought her power, but it could not buy a future for her line. The lines twisted, broke, or passed to distant cousins, rendering the immense personal sacrifices of these women moot. History simply and cruelly moved on. Perhaps the most devastating example of this futility comes from the great success story of the 19th century, Queen Victoria. Like Maria Theresa, she was a master of the dynastic game, a true matriarch. She loathed pregnancy, describing the experience in her private letters with visceral disgust as being like a dog or a cow, a state of biological servitude. Yet she endured it 9 times. Her goal was not mere succession, but a grand, continent-spanning political project. She became the grandmother of Europe, marrying her children and grandchildren into nearly every royal house on the continent. Her strategy was explicit to weave a web of family ties so tight that a major European war would become unthinkable. A mere family squabble to be resolved over tea at Windsor. The result was a catastrophic failure of spectacular proportions. Her grandchildren, King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, through his wife, Alexandra. Another of Victoria's beloved granddaughters would become the figureheads of opposing sides in the unprecedented slaughter of the First World War. The family web, meant to ensure peace, instead ensured that the world's greatest conflict had the bitter, personal edge of a toxic family feud. Furthermore, Her bloodline carried a different kind of curse, a microscopic flaw with tragic consequences. She was a carrier for hemophilia, the royal disease, which she passed down through her daughters to the royal families of Spain and, most famously, Russia. The suffering of her great-grandson, the Tsarevich Alexei, whose every bump and scrape was a life-threatening event, destabilized the Russian monarchy and contributed to the climate of desperation that fueled the revolution. The very blood she so successfully propagated was itself a vessel of tragedy. The dust settled to reveal a continent in ruins, 3 empires destroyed, and a genetic legacy of pain. If the bloodlines failed, if the grand strategies for peace collapsed into war, and if the suffering so often led to nothing, what then remains? What is the true legacy of these women? Stripped of the dynastic purpose that defined and so often destroyed them. To find the answer, we must look past the cradles and the coffins, past the wedding beds and the deathbeds. We must look at what they did with the power they had, often in spite of their biological destiny. Their true legacy was never the children they bore, but the strength, intelligence, and resilience they forged in the fires of their ordeal. The legacy of Maria Theresa is not her 16 children, but her sweeping administrative, military, and educational reforms that modernized the vast Habsburg Empire, laying the groundwork for a new kind of centralized state. She fought for her inheritance and won. The legacy of Blanche of Castile is not merely her son, St. Louis, but the unified kingdom of France itself, which survived and thrived because of her unmatched political acumen and sheer courage during its most vulnerable moment. The legacy of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who outlived her jailer and most of her rebellious sons, is the very concept of courtly love and a cultural richness that shaped European literature and thought for centuries. And the legacy of Mumtaz Mahal is, ironically, the one thing that has outlasted the Mughal Empire, the Taj Mahal. We can now see it not as a simple monument to a romantic, passive love, but as a testament to the staggering human cost of that love. A structure of impossible beauty, built upon a foundation of impossible suffering. The echoes of their story reverberate even now. The intense media scrutiny on the reproductive lives of modern royal women. The public countdowns to pregnancy announcements. The obsessive global commentary on their bodies, these are the faint, sanitized ghosts of the pressures that crushed their ancestors. The difference, of course, is modern medicine and a measure of personal autonomy that queens of the past could only have dreamt of. Yet, the public sense of ownership over a royal woman's body lingers, a relic of a more brutal time. In the end, this has been a story about the profound, invisible sacrifice upon which so much of recorded history is built. We celebrate the kings, the empires, and the dynasties, but we forget the silent biological warfare that enabled it all. We stand in Westminster Abbey and read the plaque detailing the political achievements of Queen Anne, her role in the Act of Union that created Great Britain. But we do not hear the echoes of her weeping for the 17 children buried beneath our feet. We must remember them not as wombs, but as women, not as vessels for the royal bloodline, but as the very sources of its strength, whose endurance, intelligence, and sheer will to survive were their greatest contributions. Their story is a powerful, tragic reminder that the most important parts of history are not always the loudest. That power and powerlessness can coexist in a single human heart, and that the individuals who bear our legacies are always greater and more complex than the legacies themselves. So the next time you see a king's portrait, look for the queen standing beside him, her story, often written in silence and sacrifice, is the ink with which so much of his power was signed. They were the architects of continuity, the silent partners in empire, whose biological and emotional labor built the foundations of the world we study today. It leaves us with a profound question, and I'm curious to know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe is the greatest price of absolute power? Is it the wars fought on the battlefield, or the humanity lost in the quiet chambers of the palace? These are the kinds of questions we aim to explore in every story we tell. If you believe these hidden histories deserve a voice and wish to join us on these journeys into the shadows of the past, please consider taking a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hitting that notification bell ensures you'll never miss a new chapter. And while you wait for our next exploration, you might be interested in the tragic fate of another royal woman trapped by circumstance in our video. The isolated madness of Joanna of Castile. Thank you for listening.